Hello, Year 10. It's now lesson 11. We're still talking about how the Nazis kept control, though bear in mind that when we talk about opposition, they could go in any chapter. I'm hoping you're all ready for this. It's not as note-heavy as the last one, so don't worry, the video will be shorter. But you know the drill by now. There'll be several tasks. I'll ask you to pause. So, on with the show. We need to talk about how to give you specific examples. Last lesson, I ended with an exhortation saying you need to know specific examples. I gave you the types, but I didn't give you any specific examples. I mean, I mentioned von Stauffenberg and I mentioned Sophie Scholl. They count. That is pretty much all you need to know. Throw those at an essay and you win. But that's only 2 examples and it's not very satisfying. I mean, what are the different types of opposition? How does it even work? And where was my proof that there's this climate of support and consent? And I go, you know what, rhetorical device student, you're right. I need to explain in a bit more depth. So let's do that. Here I have a photograph from the time, it's in colour, of Hitler giving a speech with several thousand of his closest friends in attendance in uniform. It's a good job they all remembered to bring their flag. This fellow, although wearing the right uniform, clearly forgot his flag. Poor guy, oh, forgotten the flag. It does look a bit stupid. Anyway, that's not the point. Ooh. Let's start with this photograph here. Get rid of my face. There you go. Here is an interesting photograph. It's Germans greeting a motorcade of leading Nazis, including Hitler, in Nuremberg. What is Nuremberg? Well, it's a place where the Nazis give rallies. That's like political speech, and everyone turns up to have a listen. So, what do you think this photograph shows? What's the message for us? What's its purpose? Why was it made? Have a think about it and pause the video. Okay, I'm going to assume you paused. What can we say about this? Well, it looks like there's an atmosphere of support. That atmosphere of consent, everybody on the side of the Nazis? Absolutely. Look at those children grinning and smiling. Look at the women in the background. Look at the soldiers shouting their approval. All of them doing the Nazi salute. What is terrifying is the youngness of the children here. You might say, oh, sir, I said the children were forced into it by the soldiers and were only looking like they were happy. But you've been children. You know how this works. You can't be forced to look happy. Certainly not this girl here. No way is she being forced. No way is he being forced. No way is this fellow being forced. You've all been there. Check your photographs from holidays. You know how it works. If you're being forced, you know about it. These people were keen. However, they are children, and ultimately they'll do what everyone else is doing, especially authority figures like, I don't know, soldiers. So they join in. What I find fascinating about this photograph actually isn't the children, it's this fellow. Don't know what's going on there, but he's very much at odds with the rest of the photograph. On the face of it, though, the reason for this photograph being taken is for the Nazis to show their support, and the reason I show it to you is it does very clearly show that atmosphere of consent, everybody assuming that everybody else is on board with the Nazi project. And you know what? Some of them are. This is 37 though. Hang on. Next one is this one. It's German workers saluting a DAF. Remember the DAF, the German trade union that replaced all the other trade unions, the Nazi trade union, the Deutsche Arbeitenfront. And it's they're saluting the DAF leader at the end of a speech given in a German factory. If you look carefully, you'll realize that absolutely nobody here looks happy. Nobody. It's all very grudging because they're workers. And at the end of the day, they just want to go home. Ringd, of course, is a very famous man. Turns out he was a communist. He refused to salute any Nazis, and he did it several times. He was never arrested for it. Was he brave? Well, of course, the terrorist state would have destroyed him. Utterly brave man. I mean, fair play. Give him a round of applause. Did he do anything to bring down the Nazis? Oh. No, not really. So when there was opposition, the opposition wasn't terribly good. I think we all agree with that. Which brings me to our first task. Now, if you're going to do this properly, if you're going to play the game properly, you know the drill by now. I'll set up the task, you'll pause the video, carry out the task. And it's an introductory task to this lesson. With someone you can trick into helping you, can you categorize the different actions taken by German people, there in the Arial narrow font, with the headings that you have been given, there in the bold Rockwell font? If you complete this task of putting the headings in one place and the actions underneath them, try to think about which kinds of people will carry out the different actions. Try to do this in 5 minutes, but not yet. Here are the cards. There'll be a separate file in the show my homework. I'll probably call it cards or something. These are Arial Narrow, and these are Bold Rockwell. And your job is to put these actions under these headings. I've said to try and do it in 5 minutes. So, are you ready? Pause the video. I'm going to assume you've paused the video and are ready to move on. So here we go. Oh, there we go. So, deliberately not working hard in the workplace. Where does that go? I guess that goes under lack of enthusiasm. Of course it does. Avoiding meetings of the Nazi Party. Well, that's non-conformity, refusing to take part, not doing what you're supposed to do. Hiding Jews and other undesirables from the Nazis. Well, you can argue that's resistance, but it's secretive. So on one level, you're kind of assuming that they are undesirable in many ways because you're hiding them rather than joining with them in the street and saying that they're not undesirable. So it is a form of resistance, a very brave form of resistance. I would understand if you put it under acceptance, though, which isn't really a form of opposition. Telling anti-Nazi jokes in public. Well, it's not exactly protest. Lack of enthusiasm? Yeah. Resistance? Hardly. Non-conformity? I suppose there's an element of that. I'm edgy, me. I'm telling jokes that are dangerous. But mainly it's actually kind of accepting things, isn't it? This is the way things are. We may as well have a laugh. Refusing to say Heil Hitler or answer it. That's non-conformity. That's what that is. It's hardly resistance, is it? It's not going to bring down the government. Lack of enthusiasm? Protest? Reading literature banned by the Nazis. Wow. Yeah, it's acceptance. It's sort of going, I'll cock a snoot. I mean, who's going to know? What difference does it make? Not contributing to the Nazi charity, the Winterhilfswerk, the WHW. We'll talk more about them later. I think I've mentioned them already. So not contributing? Well, the Nazis, they claim this was an act of resistance and sabotage. The rest of us would go, well, it's a lack of enthusiasm. It's not a lot else. Writing anti-Nazi graffiti like, down with the Nazis. I suppose that's protest. Saying you disagree. It's not exactly resistance, is it? Not hanging Nazi flags during Nazi holidays. I guess that's non-conformity, really, isn't it? Maybe a lack of enthusiasm at the outside. It's not a lot else. Grumbling and complaining about the Nazis. Yeah, no, that's just acceptance, isn't it? You're accepting that they just don't like it very much. Being less than enthusiastic about joining in. Yeah, no, that's literally lack of enthusiasm. I wrote it specifically to fit under it. Not joining Nazi groups like the Hitler Youth or the DAF. Well, that's non-conformity. Maybe lack of enthusiasm. It's hardly protest. Listening to jazz music on the radio. Taking the bridge. It's got a bruise. Past the bridge. Sorry, I don't understand jazz. I guess it's low-level non-conformity, perhaps. You might say, well, is it really? Is it just kind of accepting the way things are? Yeah, it kind of is. Joining anti-Nazi groups like the Edelweiss Pirates. Now here we have some protest. Is it resistance, though? No, of course it isn't. Not praying to the German God, but going to church. Yeah, what? I suppose that's acceptance. It's not a lot else, is it? Making mistakes that cause more work for others, i.e. just, not working hard enough. You've done it in lessons, you know what I mean. Is it a form of resistance? I hate to break your bubble. No, it's not. Is it a form of protest? Yeah, no, not really. It's like submitting one essay late and then submitting another essay a couple of days later, also late, without waiting for the feedback from the first one. It creates more work. It means that you get to feel hard done to, and that's about it. It's a form of acceptance. Complaining quietly to others at Nazi meetings. Incredibly dangerous. This sort of thing could get you reported. You could get sent to a concentration camp. It's not anything. It's a lack of enthusiasm at best. Spying for foreign governments. Now that's resistance. That's what Soapade did. Attempting to assassinate Hitler. Now that's resistance. But only one person tried it. Doing things as normal and ignoring the Nazis. Just pretending they're not there. Yeah, That's acceptance. It's what a lot of people did. Alrighty then. Told you the youth swung against the Nazis by listening to jazz. Development task. With someone who needs punishing, I mean a willing partner. Can you use the following cards to organize your previous cards into those that show effective, ineffective examples of opposition or lack of support? I.e., you've now put them under headings. Cool. Take the headings away for a moment. And the next task, you're going to have about 5 minutes to do. I'll come back to that in a moment. Here they are, though. What I would suggest is you put effective on one side of the screen and ineffective on the other side of a bit of table. Opposition on the top, perhaps, lack of support on the bottom, or the other way around, vice versa. Doesn't really matter. 4 points. Then, using those quadrants between the four, can you show where those examples go? Are they ineffective or effective? Are they actual opposition or just a lack of support? Do you see what I mean? And then see where you get the cluster. You've got about 5 minutes. Pause the video at this point. I'm going to assume you pause the video, and now my face is peeking back in. It doesn't really matter where they go. However, what you should have found, I think, is that the quadrant of ineffective and lack of support had more stuff in it. So if it's down here in this corner, ineffective, lack of support, sort of lives down here. That quadrant probably has more in it than the effective opposition. Basically, the effective opposition ought to have the least in it, and maybe 1 or 2 things, possibly the assassination of Hitler or trying to assassinate Hitler, and spying for foreign governments would probably go in there. But that's rare. And the point I'm trying to make with this is that what the opposition did wasn't very effective, and there wasn't a lot of it. Which brings me to this worksheet. Now, in a lesson, you'd have about half an hour to do this, but you're doing this at home, so you can take as long as you need. I will go through the answers momentarily, but you'll notice there's 4 tasks, 4 sources and 3 tasks. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading through them. Print off the worksheet or just have it up on the screen and work through it in your notes. Don't worry, you can't, well, you can be wrong, but as long as you back up what you're saying with a quote and something from the source, you're probably going to get a reasonable distance. The idea behind this is to practice working with source material. Task 1 says, study source A, who opposed the Nazis? This is your reading comprehension. Can you take from source A list of people that went against the Nazis, and can you give me the quotes to back it up? 2, study source B. How useful is this source, quite a famous source, in explaining opposition to the Nazis? Now remember, with opposition to the Nazis, we're talking about why they were ineffective, who dared oppose them, and why they didn't do any good. And I think Niemöller, the confessional church fellow, you may remember him, might be able to explain this for us. And then I'm going to ask you to look at the last 2 sources. I'm going to flip it. How useful are they in looking at support? Also, source C is one of my favorite sources. So, are you ready? Then pause the video and have a go. I'm going to assume you paused the video because my face has disappeared. Here we go. Let's go through the answers. Now, in the background, in case you're wondering, it's an image of Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement. I think at the point of arrest, but I might be wrong. That's Sophie Scholl in the middle with the flower. There we go. She's wearing a white rose, you see. She gets killed by guillotine. Judge Roland fries her and sentences her to death. On the way to the guillotine, she shouts out, "We've only said aloud what the rest of you are thinking." Very brave. She's 16 years old, you know, your age. There's something to be said for youth and the ability to stand up for what you believe in. Sophie Scholl absolutely shows this. Did she change anything? Well, no, because most people didn't listen. But I think she was right. And increasingly, as I grow older, I wish I was more of a Sophie Scholl. Not dead. Sorry, too soon. Study source A. Who opposed the Nazis? Use quotes from the source to fully explain your answer. Well, this shouldn't take too long. It's a relatively easy thing. This is from Ian Kershaw, a historian who studied the Nazis in 2005. Who opposed them? Well, if you got this on an exam, it would be an interpretation, and it would be used to back up other source material. So you've got left-wing socialist politicians, called SOPAID. You've got young people rebelling against being forced to join the Hitler Youth. You've got Edelweiss Pirates or the Swing Youth Movement. You've got a small number of army generals, conservatives, who were worried that Hitler would lead them into a war they would lose. There's the Catholic and Protestant priests and the confessional church. That's it. That's all you've got. It's just a list of people, isn't it? Now, in an exam, there might be sources to back that up. Don't worry, reading comprehension, I wasn't anticipating you finding that one too difficult. Hopefully you underlined, highlighted, annotated the heck out of that source and just went, well, it's obvious, it's this list. Yes. And hopefully you cut it down so you weren't just copying the source out. The next question was studying source B. How useful is this source in explaining opposition to the Nazis? Now, utility, usefulness, is what a source shows you, sure, but it's also who wrote it and what that tells you. Now, on the face of it, this says a lot about why the opposition failed. Did you pick up why? Absolutely. The opposition refused to stand up for one another. And Niemöller shows that quite neatly when he says, then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me. He explains how he didn't stand up for any of the other groups, and they all get destroyed, and they come for him. But it's also useful because of its provenance. Martin Niemöller is from the confessional church, so you can riff on your knowledge about the confessional church and how it was a refuge for Christians that didn't want to support the Nazis. You can also point out that just for that, he ends up in a concentration camp and was killed before the war ended. In other words, he utterly fails to bring down the Nazis or provide any kind of significant opposition. And you can link that to the no significant protests and the idea that the Nazis are in power for 12 years. Furthermore, you could point out there was an uptick in opposition once the war began, and the fact that he was killed just before the war ended says a lot. There's loads you can pick up from that. I hope that's enough for now. And then say, okay, how are these sources useful to an historian studying support for the Nazis in Germany? Well, on the one hand, source D shows a bunch of boys doing the Nazi salute, and they all look very proud of themselves. It's from the Deutsche Junge, the German youth, or the young fellows, as it translates into English more appropriately. And they're about 7. And you get a feel for how the Nazis were able to maintain support, but that will become more apparent when we've done youth. For now, it looks, you could probably say, oh, well, people supported the Nazis. Absolutely. Source C is a photograph of the Edelweiss pirates, and we know the Edelweiss pirates were against the Nazis. And so how are they useful? Well, they tell us that the youth supported the Nazis because they were kind of drilled into it, but also the older youth went against the Nazis, a bit like you guys, because you go against pretty much anything that's told you to do. If you're told to do it, then that's the last thing you'll actually do. I understand that. You understand that. There's an element of subversion. So between them, they're quite helpful. They tell us the youth are on both sides, and they explain why the youth couldn't really do a lot. When you look at what the Edelweiss pirates are doing, they're out on a walk with an accordion. You can't do anything without an accordion, it's true. Are they really going to bring down the Nazis? Well, of course not. I mean, look at her. She's every teenage girl that's ever gone on a walk with friends and then realised it was a really bad idea because it's a long walk and she wants to be at home. And the accordion. By the way, if you're looking at this, I'm just going to point out that this fellow is about to die. She's going to kill him. I'm not going to point out why. I'm sure you can figure it out for yourselves. But bless him, he's about to die. The point here is, how useful are they? Well, they're useful because they show certain things. They're useful because they come from certain backgrounds, and they tell us something about what the Nazis are worried about, losing the support of their youth, which is why they bother taking the photograph in source D. For them to be worried about it implies that it must have been a problem. However, you know from your own knowledge that the Nazis are paranoid, so they're constantly assuming the youth aren't going to be with them. Source C explains why the youth aren't terribly good at bringing down the Nazis, even though they oppose them, because, you know, they're going out on a walk. It's not really a huge deal. You get the idea. Oh, hang on. Ah, yeah, the Stauffenberg bomb plot, the aftermath thereof. There's Goering in a cape, because why not? And some plenary thoughts. This brings us to the end of the lesson. Yeah, I know. You spent about, I assume, half an hour or more going through those source questions. You've also done those card sorts. I imagine now you've done enough. So here's my plenary thoughts. Although very brave and worthy of admiration, those that opposed the Nazis were doomed to fail. They could never succeed. How far do you agree with this statement? Now, If this were a lesson, we'd have a proper discussion about it with a back and forth. And I'd really love to know what your thoughts are on this and what you think of it. Because, believe it or not, there's a reason I'm in teaching, and it's to hear your opinion. I learn as much as you do, just very different things. As it is, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts in the Show My Homework comments. You can't do it on the YouTube video because I keep disabling comments. I undisabled them once and got some randomer telling me to grow my channel. So I've killed those off again. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. You can pause it here if you like, because I'm about to get rid of it. So assuming that you paused it and you've had a look and that you're going to share your thoughts, thank you very much in advance. I will pick up what you've got there and I'll respond to them as soon as I can. But now we've gone through support, terror, propaganda, and the super secret fourth, opposition, and the weakness of it. You now know the full bit of chapter 2, how it was the Nazis were able to keep control in Germany. And also you've got a feel for the fact that, well, human beings are disappointing. Robert A. Heinlein, famous American author, once said, does history record any example in which the majority were correct? And Nazi Germany seems to show us an example proving his point. I hope this lesson has been useful to you. Do let me know when you've finished it. Do let me know if you're keeping up and whether this output is sustainable. I'll try and keep going in the meantime. Thank you very much if you have been watching. And yeah, have a lovely day, Year 10. Enjoy the rest of it. I hope the weather is good where you are. And I shall see you in the next lesson.